2, 1. And then I have to make sure the weird thing is when you live stream it, it shows it up in YouTube and it starts playing the video while you're live streaming, which is, so I have to like pause it so it doesn't record me saying that I'm saying all this. Okay. Did that 2, 1. Okay. All right. Now we're on back in real time. As I was telling Ernest, Tom, it's been a day. I'm going to ask Ernest to share for the first 10 minutes while I catch my breath and eat breakfast, and then we will go on to other things. Thank you, Ernest. Take it away.
All right. So let me take over the screen here. Okay. So my homework is to provide a alternative to the rebuilding society endeavor. I'm not sure what the exact name is. They kind of like, it's kind of not specific, but essentially they have a
space makers from the Center for Humane Technology.
Okay, yeah.
And also Solid, that was the other technology that we were discussing.
Yeah. So, and I touched on both of those, but starting at the end, like the actual homework, I imagine this place in hyperspace where ideas float, where ideas are, similar to how tweets are in the cloud, some it's kind of metaphysics, but so you have somebody has an idea, they post it out there, and others can discover ideas and can expand on them. They can even fuse two ideas together if that's if the problem that they're trying to solve requires it. So it's like the good ideas would emerge out of this milieu where you have a bunch of ideas and people looking at them and working on them. It's like what do we have now? Where you like a startup. What's the name of this thing? Words. An incubator. It's like similar to an incubator, but without the money, without the investors, and without you having to kiss their butt and all that. An idea would grow because of its merits, and if it's if it helps people, then it's great. If it doesn't, then it won't get contributors because they won't find it worthwhile, because there's no such thing as it's going to make a lot of money, so therefore we're going to do it, even though even if it's bad. Money goes where money will be. So sometimes there's bad ideas and people fund them because even though it's bad, it's going to make money. So this place would not be guided by money. It will be guided by the helpfulness of ideas and projects. And that's how they would grow, and people will contribute to them. And then eventually they might decide to make it into a service or a product that helps people. But all without this, the financial motive. The last few weeks have been terrible because of all kinds of financial, economic, and political things. When it comes to banking, the gist is a lot of costs, a lot of levers that are pulled. But the gist is that a couple of banks that bet on the T-bills got caught up in the Fed raising interest rates, and not adapting quickly enough, and they got run on. People got wind of their trouble and try to get their money out, and they got in problems. But that's is purely a financial situation. This nobody was suffering health. Not, there was no product that was uh, uh, people couldn't get to. It was just money, just numbers, and because of those numbers, a whole lot of people might have lost their livelihood, and some people could have potentially lost their savings, but lucky for them, the government came out to bail out the bank. So the point is, like, to me, being ruled by money and financial benefit is not great. So I'm looking for a place, a human network. Let's not call it the internet, even though it could be based on internet, IP and all those things. A place where people are free to, and we've talked about this. We've talked about humankind, but as I kept thinking about humankind, it's a very idealistic place, and we can't get there quickly. You have to get there by stages, and the article that I want to talk about now talks about that. So we have at the base, we have existence. We are born and we are in this world, and we need something that reflects that. So it's like a network that provides basic existence services like identity and the ability for you to take your data from place to place, so that you are not beholden to specific corporations that hoard your data and even trade with it. This base layer that reflects existence, you have strong identity, so that people can't steal your identity, and that people can, once they establish certain data, including who are their friends, a social graph, that social graph should be able to go with them anywhere that they go, to any service or club or whatever. Like, never again should a person be beholden to one specific company because all their friends are in that company. No, everybody is more porous. It's more individualistic. It's not centered on these silos and these portals. No, your information is centered on you, and you take it, or you manage it yourself. Like also the need for huge computer centers, it's reduced or eliminated because computing is centered on individuals. So as one person, I don't need a whole lot of computing power to manage my affairs. Let's say a bunch of people decide to build a platform for themselves to communicate. Well, then they will need a few more computers, but they still don't need the power that these corporations need to provide their services. So, I hear a lot of this term scaling. Scaling doesn't scale. Well, your scale doesn't matter to me. Is the scale is what matters to me is my scale. And
Ernest, just a quick time check. Another 5 minutes. Are you on track?
Okay.
Let's go to 120. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in essence, people should be able to do their computing for free and easily. They should not depend on any corporation or any company. Now, on top of that base layer, we talk about allegiance. Allegiance meaning, okay, once you realize that you exist, you might need to make some friendships or relationships to survive, to be able to eat, to be able to get shelter. So that's where you get together with people according to your principles, your morals. You're not going to get with people who steal from you. You're going to get with people who share, who have a common goal, that with protection or manufacturing or whatever. So, but you're aligned in some way. That way, and that's why you, at some point, let go of a little bit of your identity and you put it in a group. So at that point, the group is more important than your individual wants. They're still centered on you, but together you have a different set of purposes and rules, ethics that you all share. And again, you're not going to invite somebody who doesn't share those things, because it's going to be not productive. So in this level is where humane space is. And that's where we codify. The most important thing is that you can codify everything. You codify your principles, and we, to the best of our ability, make those things computable. And so that people who share principles, somehow they find each other, and they get, once they build a group, they can modify those principles, right, at the group level, but everybody still has to align with them. And people can evolve, and then they can decide, oh, my core doesn't match this group's morals anymore, so they can exit freely, no problem. And because of the base layer, they can take their social graph and their personal data wherever they go. They can even go back to the base layer if they want to, if they don't want to stay in humane space. But this is the space where people get together and accomplish things. On top of that is where we finally have humankind, which is more, what is the word? It's more about transcendence. Like, you want to leave a mark in the world, and that's where we find that you want to share your knowledge, you want to share the things that you have accumulated, or the relationship that you have had. You want to transcend your physical life. So that's what, that's we are the product of the past. We are the product of great people, or not so great people also. We are the product of Hitler to some degree. Hitler, he was a terrible person, but he left part of himself in the world, just like Mussolini did, just like Abraham Lincoln did, just like Martin Luther King did. They died, but they live in us. So humankind is to reflect that, reflect our humanity, our past, to help us with our present, and then to help us also transcend into the future. So that's the highest demonstration of our humanity. So we have existence at the bottom layer. We have allegiance in the middle. That's where you thrive and you do your business. And then we have transcendence at the humankind level. That's where we want to be better humans, the best humans that we want to be. And we think of the future, not just the present, not just how to use things, but we want to transcend our lives and contribute to the future. And that's what the article deals, and then it asks for people interested to donate and help us to get this thing forward.
All right. Excellent, Ernest. My notes are in the text, but I don't need to respond right now. Tom, did you want to take a few minutes? We'll take the next 10 minutes to kind of process Ernest's thing, and then I'll shift to my solid homework.
Okay. Well, I just wondered about one thing. The idea that if you do good things, for example, share knowledge or volunteer services, you can earn a currency. There's one young man in Norway who's just put forward that idea that you could earn an artificial currency that would be based on your contribution to society. It seems like you're thinking in that direction.
I am thinking in that, but then as first I was thinking of reputation. Remember, I was thinking of you gain reputation, but then I'm like, how do you compute that? How and then the reputation of a person is not going to be the same with two people. The reputation of DeSantis is not the same to me as it might be to some MAGA person.
Right. By the way, do you guys realize you're reinventing whuffie? Like Cory Doctorow wrote an entire book about the idea of how do you create social capital, reputation as a computable resource.
Okay.
And he talks about, he has a very simplistic model with right-handed whuffie is like positive social capital. Left-handed whuffie is this person has social capital with people you despise, so you should interpret that as a negative. But anyway, there is an entire space of people who've researched and talk about this.
Put that in the chat, the reference.
I just did, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I'm not directly following the chat. Okay, yeah, okay, interesting.
So to finish my point is that, yes, I was thinking of in some measure, so way to measure reputation, but I ended up with that's an individual thing. So the best thing that we can do is to provide to store history, like everything that you have done is in history. You can, and once in history, it can be analyzed and judged by anyone. So somebody who wants to say, hey, is this a person that I want to associate with? Well, they will have all the information in that person's history, in that could be divided in their works, and it could be also in the comments. Like we have this word of mouth thing. So what are people saying about you? That should be taken into account too. But then it's a personal thing. But then if we have codified principles and morals somehow, then you can, to some way, you can have the system help you. Hey, help me. Does this person match my principles? So the system can do a quick matching and say, according to your principles and this person's principles, you kind of match. So if that will be like your barrier, your entry point into, do I want to connect with this person? So instead of,
have you written down some principles? Can you give an example of a principle in this space?
Yes, I've written. It's kind of difficult. Like some principles that I'm talk about is humanism. So what does that mean? Well, that means putting the interests of individuals ahead of other things, material things. I was putting equality. What does that mean, and how do you measure it? Like, I mean, treating people the same regardless of their status. So, and this is not, easy, but how do we codify that? How do we make it into a measurable thing?
You're segueing into the next section, because like we've had this conversation a few times, and then we decided to focus on the digitome aspects of what is the shared underlying infrastructure, and we iterated to those 10 principles, which we were trying to see, right? And I think we agreed that like having a general set of objective principles around the physical infrastructure is probably easier than having all these higher level humane transcendence principles and conversion to something meaningful. So we were going to try to experiment on that first.
Yeah, and that's where humanity is. That's where the base layer. Like how do we so what we're talking about is distribution, what is distributed and decentralized. So that's at the base layer. Then once you get up the humane space layer, that's when you start with, okay, what does equality mean? That's where we once we have solved the base problem, we can start elevating our thoughts into the other ones. So yeah, you're correct in that we have some principles, but they are the basic, they are the absolute foundational and basic ones that we need to establish to provide what we want, like which is a network that is open, that people can use, that is distributed, that is reliable, secure. All these design principles is what we are using for, but instead of humankind, now we have 3 layers. So we're going to put those at the bottom layer so that anybody can join. That's the layer that anybody, even evil people or people who don't.
Right. So I have a question, but I want to make sure that Tom got his question answered sufficiently.
I'm fine, thank you. I see the
Okay.
principle. Right.
Right. So this is I think I'd like to touch on the last point you made there in the next few minutes, is that so a lot of these things in principle can be solved by faster, more efficient computation, right? If the right infrastructure is in place so that anyone can cheaply host their own secure, globally scalable infrastructure, at that point, a lot of these problems go away. The one thing that I'm concerned about is like, okay, if everyone has this infrastructure and we have this fluid world, and including all the evil people who agree to play with the infrastructure, there's 2 things you say which feel like their intention to me, but I'm not sure if it's a design problem or just my understanding. It's like we want to have these small communities that have mutual allegiance based on this shared history, and they you always are free to fork and leave your community. I think you mentioned that as a really important rule, right? The right to fork.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is just an open ecosystem question, is history has shown that highly cohesive societies generally outcompete highly autonomous societies where people do what they want. And historically, those cohesion has been enforced by hierarchical power structures, religion, the state, corporations, etc. Right? Like the reason we are using YouTube, right, and Google Docs is because these quote unquote evil corporations provide vastly better service than their free open alternatives. And so, because like an open source project, well, I like this idea, but I like my idea better. I'm just going to fork it off and do my own thing, and nobody ever gets critical mass to compete against the monoliths. And I guess that was the question I had: is if the barriers to exit are too low, because we want them to be low, can humane communities ever outcompete, or how do humane communities outcompete the exploitive ones?
Well, the answer is that they don't need to outcompete them. Like
well, the thing is like they outcompete them for you, right? Today, like we don't get a better YouTube or a better Google Docs from the open world.
Yes.
And right, and as long as the evil people say, "Hey, why don't you come onto our platform? We'll claim that we're following all these rules, but if you come over here and use this service that's way better, like, than what your hippie friends over here are building, how do you keep people from being seduced to the dark side?"
Yeah, well, I guess the freedom to set your own path is important. You have to be able to move to where you want. So we have an example with Twitter. So Elon Musk bought Twitter, and that caused a whole lot of people to experiment with other platforms. There's Mastodon and others. I think Mastodon will be the biggest one. So these people, some of them who depend on their influencers, and they depend on their Twitter thing, but they still made a decision to leave Twitter because their principles are so valuable to them, and the current direction of Twitter is so anathema to them that they said, "Sorry, I'm going to leave my audience, my Twitter audience, and some of them might follow me to Mastodon, some of them might not, but my principles are more important. My peace of mind tells me I need to leave Twitter and I have to go to Mastodon. Mastodon is slower. It has a lot fewer people, a lot fewer capabilities, but people are happier in there. So is Mastodon a competition to Twitter? No, because there's another service called Blue Sky or something that the original Twitter co-founder is opening. So there's more competition, and that's good. I think competition in this posting thing is amazing. So Elon Musk has his thing. He wants to create a super app, similar to how the Chinese have some app. I forgot the name, but anyway, he wants to have Twitter operate his way. The Dorsey guy wants to create his other platform. We have Mastodon. We have a whole bunch of other ones. And yes, they're the giants, and then there's small fry. But people are happy at the small level. Like in Mastodon, I don't get all these posts that I'm not interested in, because I get them because they're ads or they're pushed, or it's because of the people that I follow, that I used to follow on Twitter are crazy because that was cool. I don't want to follow all these people.
All right, time check.
On Mastodon, I get to restart. I get to say, okay, this is my new, my Mastodon audience, and I need to, and I can behave differently. I get a different type of follower, a different type of person in there. It's people that have been burned on Twitter and they want to start fresh. So that's what the leave anytime you want and join and create your own space or join another one is important, because people don't feel trapped.
No. Okay. There's time.
Yeah.
Okay. No. I think you answered my question, which is that Mastodon is a good proof point that if the value alignment is strong enough, the technology, the user experience and reach gap matters less. So even if centralized systems always have a better user experience and always have more reach, the value alignment piece compensates for that. And Mastodon is a good proof point. Like, Mastodon is good enough. There are lots of Twitter competitors before this, and they all failed. Mastodon at least seems to be self-sufficient in that it's viable enough to survive and provide that unique value. And the second thing I realized, there are lots of other competitors. Mastodon does have its own barriers to exit, right? And more importantly, the other systems have an incentive to interoperate with Mastodon if they can. So they provide this sort of federated coalition that's an alternative. And I think your point is, if they're built on these open principles, then it's an order of magnitude simpler to fork and share and interoperate than a proprietary system locked under a single company like Twitter.
Correct.
And so even if you have forking, if the ecosystem is mostly compatible, it's good enough. Yeah,
and then things can coalesce depending on the need, right? So if something happens, some crisis happens, then people get together and help each other. So that's when we have like emergence. What is it? Intentional emergence. Like, there's this problem here. Oh, we need to gather resources and solve it. And because you are free to move around, you can do that easily. You don't have to say, oh, I need to. It's hard to compare, like having to move from Facebook to some other platform in an emergency. But just like if you need to establish contacts to get resources to one place, like, a distributor or a driver or so, it's easy for you to have those contacts anywhere if you can move them, or if they're not tied to a specific company.
Right. Yeah. No. Okay. Good. So this is a good segue to the next piece, which is my homework on Solid. And there's two things in it. One of them, I'm evaluating Solid. The other is that I'm evaluating our initial list of principles. Because I think you articulated a use case, which I don't remember us hearing before, and I'm curious whether that fits in one of our existing values.
Okay.
All right. So let me share my screen. And this is my attempt to do the thing that Tom cheerfully claimed was impossible. And so we will see whether he still thinks so after he sees my attempt. I'm very curious. how that plays out. So this is the, to review, we have two categories, what we called adaptive architecture and inclusive governance, and then 10 values. And then these were the original criteria, and I only had to tweak a couple of them in my own head to be actionable in this case. And what I did is I went through the solid specification and technologies, and I asked myself, okay, my goal as a systems builder is to design a system. So like, let's say, Ernest is the customer, right? He is the person I'm trying to satisfy, and he has codified these 10 values of, these are the figures of merit and constraints that he cares about. And I, as the contractor, say, okay, I want to help Ernest build this thing. Then I am looking at the solid architecture and saying, okay, if I was going to build this with solid, would I be able to satisfy the customer Ernest? So I'm doing this design analysis using these values. And I'm presenting the results of the analysis to Ernest to see if he believes me, right? Because he's ultimately the human being who owns these values. And I'm interpreting them a certain way, which may or may not be accurate, but we'll find out. And I'm just going to try and state my reasoning as clearly as possible to see, A, if my reasoning makes sense, and secondly, whether he agrees with my conclusions. Okay, and what are the things, and this is a little bit of a toy exercise, but we'll go through it as far as we can and see. So the first idea is federated. And this idea of decisions being held by the lowest layer, which I reframe as, well, do I have the freedom to make these decisions and the high level cannot overrule them? And when I looked at solid, like the only part of their spec which seems that it's easy for a formal community a high level community to overrule a lower level community is this idea of a formal vocabulary, which is something that is defined kind of centrally. It does feel like those are not trivially forkable, but they are opt-in. And so that feels like that's the one possible failure mode that would violate this federation, the ability of lower levels to make their own decisions. So that's kind of how I now, let's stop at this one because this is kind of the first point and we want to spend more time on it. First, let's start with Ernest. Does that make sense to you as an analysis, as what you intended?
Yes, vocabulary, that specific example is a good example. So it could be both. You can define at the low level, people decide which terms to use, right? And then they group, as a small group, they can decide more on that vocabulary. But then if they decide, if the group decides we need to have a consistent vocabulary, so that things work smoothly. Yes, at the low level is great that we can define our terms, but somebody
like someone defines this is the vocabulary used for shipping aluminum, ingots around the world, right? There's a vocabulary around those things that's defined in solid, right? And if that's defined, well, that group that's the standard organization for that can override and say, this is the word for it now, and then you can just opt in or on out. Now, you could create a rival cartel and say, okay, well, we're going to open this thing and then people can do both, whatever. So that was like the one thing that seems the most rigid and the least easy to decentralize or defederate, as it were. Anyway, so I think you'll buy the, so is that close enough for us? Can I go to Tom now?
Yes.
Okay, so Tom, this is my first attempt to do something that you said was impossible. And I'm curious whether you think I succeeded, and if I succeeded by changing the question. You're muted. You're still muted, Tom. I succeeded by silencing all opposition.
Yeah. You need to repeat what you say I claimed was impossible for me to check that I held that view. And
so what I said is you said, I asked you to rate these things using, a language style estimation table.
yeah,
And you gave me numbers that you said were totally made up because it's impossible to actually come up with a meaningful answer to these questions unless you have experience implementing it.
okay, that's closer to what I might buy into informally. I didn't mean to throw out a challenger. Yeah, by the way, just overall, this is a pretty good start at trying to structure and quantify a set of qualities. So I'm happy with that as an interesting way to start a discussion about these things, a structured, quantified way. And I'm not worried about the actual content, because that's what any group can argue about together until they perhaps reach consensus. So I'm happy with it as a discussion, and I don't see anything there that I would have said, but I do agree it's difficult to measure certain things without there being practical implementations. And the problem with Solid is it's so new that there aren't very many. That's what I was.
So this is where I feel like, okay, so you and I are asking very different questions. And it sounds to me like the way you use language is very heavily weighted to the question of, will this work as an implementation, right?
There's a lot of truth in that.
Okay, and so and I think this is the big difference. Maybe this is framing it right. There's the will this work as an implementation versus could this work as a design, right? And there was a wonderful phrase that I wanted to bring in early with the thing about earlier, which I'll paste in the chat here. It's interesting on several levels. One is that an idea is not a design is not a prototype is not a product is, or it doesn't have users. A product is not a business, it doesn't have a system for maintaining it. A business is not a profit, it doesn't have the resources necessary to do it. A profit is not an exit, and an exit is not happiness. And in the secular world, we don't think, or in earnest world, I would say, it's like we don't care about exit, we care about impact, right? So we want to build so I think Ernest is really focused on ideas, and I'm trying to move us into the world of design, right? Because going for idea design, you have to make really conscious trade-offs, and that's what I'm trying to understand the trade-offs there. And then I think Tom wants to move to the world of product, where you actually have something real that people can use.
But can I add? I want to move there in a systematic way, which requires going through these abstractions from high-level visions on down. So I'm concerned with the process of getting there, and yeah. So I have a certain.
And I think my critique is that the process that you were following, both in practice and in theory, didn't really seem to have a space for this sort of design analysis and design construction.
Oh,
literally, when I asked you to use language on his values, you didn't seem to see this conceptual space I'm trying to inhabit.
I got a feeling like there are things I haven't told you or made you aware of in the design space because we just haven't gotten there. But I'm very heavy on the design space.
Okay.
And I could put something in the chat which sort of points to that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, so rather than relitigate all that, let's say we're going to do this now, because I think Ernest expressed skepticism that Solid would help him create the world he wants to create, right? Because it's so complicated and whatever. And I think there's two questions. One is, to what extent does Solid address the points he cares about? And then the second question is an interesting question. So first, let's ask that question. And then the second question be, could something simpler do a better job, right? In practical terms. And what's the shortest path to getting him something that he believes in? So let's do the first question, and then we'll take 10, I'll try to just go over 5 minutes in this real quick. I won't go over this in detail. You can look at it later.
Please repeat the first question.
First question is, could this architecture build something that Ernest wants?
Okay.
Right?
Very, very simple, generic answer. It would do a job, but there's no doubt that there are options which could do a better job for his purposes that we may or may not know about yet.
First of all, that's the second question. Let me ask the first question, because I want to give a precise answer to that rather than just the hand waving, right? Because this is why I did this thing. Give me my 5 minutes of fame. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is criteria of what he considers distributed? I think Solid is very much designed consistent with those principles. You can get what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest concern for me is actually the Nakamura coefficient on resilience, which is precisely around the technical question. Like, in theory, it could work, but based on the way that they have specified PODs, it looks like it's hard to implement. There's very few in existence, and I could easily imagine a world that was fully solid conformant where it had a very low resilience because only a few people could produce it efficiently at scale. And then those end up eating up all the money so that the ecosystem ends up in that stable state where it's got a few Facebook-sized entities that everyone has to use because they're best. So that's a concern there. The coordination cost, at the moment it seems low, but I can imagine it changing. So there's kind of like where I see it now, where I see it going. Those are two slightly different numbers, which is interesting. On the other hand, like those are probably true in general from any system in this space. The adaptivity I think is really high. That's part of where all the complexity comes from, is that they have so many different modules that are designed to interoperate. So it's interesting, simplicity was not explicitly there, but that cashes out in the fact that it's hard to implement these things, which is why there's only a few people doing it. So there's an interesting tension there at this level of technology. The openness, I think, is really high. It's not frictionless, but it's pretty close. Literally all their specs are on GitHub. It's very transparent. The governance is also in all these open forums. There's no, like, you have to be a multinational corporation to join, like the W3C tends to fall into. The accessibility, like they pay lip service to accessibility. I don't know if that's actually real with all these higher order constructs. So I give them a very low mark. They could come up with a white paper on accessibility that would change that very rapidly. The fact that they haven't may or may not mean anything, but that's why I gave them a low number. The historicity is good because it's in GitHub where you have this permanent historical hash record. But their decision-making process is not as codified. So there's an interesting data point. There's two things that I think have come up interestingly that are important to Ernest, which didn't show up in this list. One is, let's call it codifiability, right? The, is everything machine interpretable? And the other is emergence. Can ad hoc structures efficiently emerge? But so the sense I have from this, and I'll stop here and then we can respond and then figure out next steps, is that for this level of technology based around web standards and things like this is probably about as good as it can be done. It gives you a lot of things for free, like relatively easy on-ramping, reuse of existing modules, very high decoupling, but at a fairly high cost of complexity, and to these new points, like not as codifiable and coalescing as some of these other things we care about. It's good at things that the web is good at and bad at the things that the web is bad at. And my sense is that if we were going to do a better job, we would need something that was simpler and better addressed to our problem space. We would need to refactor existing web technologies rather than take them as a given the way the W3C did. So that's my presentation, and I'll stop here and let my dogs out, but I'll keep listening.
Okay.
Oh, very good. Great homework.
So, yeah, he's listening. Okay. I'm
So,
putting
like, first question is like, do you buy that argument? What parts of it, and not so much yes or no, but like, which parts do you find compelling, and which parts do you find more confusing or dubious? It's like, well, okay, I like your argument, except this part's here I'd really want to drill down on because I'm not as convinced that that makes sense.
okay. Just a moment, getting back here. I of course have to like your line of argument, which is multidimensional and trying to be logical, fact-based. Okay. So, and this is also based on Ernest's criteria, which I have to like. So, what's there not to like? So, all we can do, we can improve by gathering more facts, using more time. We can improve the argument. But at some point, it's there is no reason to improve it more. There is rather reason to try it out if that's easy. Put this way, if it takes 6 weeks to study something and 1 hour to implement it, then implement it in 1 hour. Okay, which is how my methods work. They say we analyze up to a point where we can make a pretty good decision, and then we let the flow of feedback or facts from reality tell us what really is happening, because what you're doing now is, of course, speculation based on too little experience and data. So I use this kind of thing to make choices quickly, probably pretty good choices, and then confirm or deny them by experiment.
Yeah, so I think this is right. So this is enough. So I think the interesting experiment that I would propose to Ernest, if he's willing to take it as homework, is, well, first of all, like the thing that seems the least, the most structurally problematic to me is this idea of a pod, which is tied into issues of complexity and usability, right? Mm-hmm. If it is easy to create a usable pod, then there will be a lot of them and the resilience will be low. If it's really, this goes back to your point of UX and reach versus openness and flexibility, right? If it is actually really cheap and easy to create pod infrastructure, then these will take over the world, and that reduces my primary concern about this system. If they're really hard to use and really hard to build, then we're going to back where if this succeeds, it's only because Facebook builds one that everyone uses, and then we're stuck in the same world we are today. That's my current initial hypothesis, and I'm wondering if Ernest would be willing to actually, there are like pod registries out there today that you could sign up for and see if these are designed to be exactly what Ernest asked for, a way that you control your own data. And there's a sliding scale of things that, like open source pods you can build yourself versus commercial ones you can sign up for, and free ones in the middle, like that. If you'd be willing to
I've got a simple direct solution, and I'll squeeze it in less than a minute. My company, graphmetrics.com, will currently give Ernest a trial site to build pods with and use Solid.
As a developer or as a user?
As a user. Anybody can say, okay, give me my pod and give me an account, and you automatically have Solid built into it, so you can experience Solid firsthand. I mean, that's a simple way of getting a pod and getting going with Solid. That's all.
Okay.
And I think, Ernest, that's a great example. Like, even if you fail because it's so hard, that would still be really useful information if you're willing to give it a try.
Yeah, I am.
So go to graphmetrics.com, and it'll the website will tell you how to sign up and get your own account and play with it. It's ready to roll.
So this is actually free to the public. So any of our thousands of viewers could do it too.
Yes, thousands of viewers could do it.
So where do we sign up? That gets started.
Website keeps on. My son builds and manages.
Okay, so he has to submit his information here, and then it will approve it.
So it can potentially take a while.
I
In
don't
theory,
know.
yes, but it's Tom. He can yell at his kids and make it happen.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
All right.
So, go for it. It gets you a pod. It's free. It gets you solid, and you can then play with it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. And
It's
in addition
real
to
solid. I mean, it really is solid, and it really is pod, and it
yeah,
really is free.
in
Yeah, so I think
addition,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
in
first we'll
addition
see
to
if,
graph metrics, I can
yeah.
see if there's a
Research
couple
others.
more. I can
Yeah.
compare the experiences.
Yeah,
Yes, it's an experiment. That's all.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
one point that I want to make to Ernest is that historical value that we talked about, or requirement that we talked about, I think you viewed it in the wrong way. You historical as the people giving history of their work in designing the standard, again, the protocol. But when I meant historical, I meant the in this view is the history of my pod. Like I can go back in time, just like
others
Git.
in mine. Okay.
Yeah, just like Kit. Like any data is versioned, and I can go to the past and see what happened. So think about it as a Git repository. In Git, you can go back.
Yeah, no, so it's both. I was focusing on others, you were focusing on mine. It's the same thing. We want to have a way to track these things. Yeah, Tom, you have a last comment?
This is why I stress defining things like scales of measure rigorously to avoid such misunderstandings. So
I did actually have it defined there, and I clarified it there because we added a few words to capture that point. So yes.
Okay. No, it's important with the written agreement. What does this mean? Then you avoid these misunderstandings. Okay.
But we don't avoid it. We detect them, and then we can iterate on them to more greater precision as we discover these misunderstandings. Yeah, right. Okay. All right. I think Ernest has homework. I will send an email again with the Zoom link, and then we look forward to, it'll be hopefully only a couple of weeks now since we're a little bit further in the month. And we will talk to you all soon. Great session, everyone.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.